One case, two lives lost. The trial of OJ Simpson shook the entire nation, turning Simpson into one of the most infamous defendants in U.S. history. To put it in perspective, his fame is such that just saying OJ is enough for people to know who you're talking about. Larry King, host of the show Larry King Live on CNN, once said, "The trial lasted 9 months, costing $20 million. 91% of television viewers followed the case, and 142 million people tuned in to the verdict on radio and television. A study even suggested that the U.S. lost over $25 billion because workers were distracted from their jobs to follow the case. So what made OJ Simpson extraordinarily famous? And why is this trial often called the case that divided America? Let's unravel these questions in today's video by Back in Time. OJ Simpson and the Trial of the Century. On a foggy Sunday night, June 12, 1994, a young couple, Boss Tepe and Bettina Rasmussen, living near 875 South Bundy Drive, suddenly heard relentless barking. Curious about the unusual behavior of their dog, they decided to take it outside to calm it down. The dog led them to the house at 875 South Bundy and stopped, staring intensely at the shadowy walkway. Following the dog's gaze, the couple discovered two lifeless bodies sprawled on the walkway. At 12:13 a.m. on June 13, a patrol car carrying officers Robert Risque and Miguel Terrazas from the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD, arrived at the scene. Detective Risque carefully stepped around small pools of blood on the brick pathway to examine the body of a woman lying face down. She was dressed in a short black dress, drenched in blood with multiple wounds. Near her, under a bush, was the body of a man, also bloodied, wearing a light brown shirt and blue jeans, his eyes wide open. After confirming both victims were deceased, Risque and Terrazas called headquarters for backup. Minutes later, Lieutenant Martin Kuhn arrived with officers Edward McGowan and Richard Walker to secure the scene. Detective Risque and a patrol officer identified the woman as Nicole Brown Simpson, the homeowner of 875 South Bundy Drive, and the ex-wife of OJ Simpson, a former NFL star and sports commentator for NBC. Inside the house, police found Nicole's two children, 9-year-old Sydney and 6-year-old Justin, still asleep. Officers woke the children, dressed them, and took them to the station to wait for a family member to pick them up. At this point, the identity of the male victim remained unknown. At 2:10 a.m., Supervising Detective Ron Phillips and Detective Mark Furman arrived to examine the crime scene. Following protocol, they refrained from touching the bodies or disturbing the scene directly. At 4:25 a.m., Detectives Tom Lang and Phil Vanatter joined the investigation, with Phillips briefing them on the situation. Standing about 6 feet away from the bodies, the detectives noticed several items near the male victim, including a set of keys, a dark cap, a pager, a blood-stained white envelope, and a bloody leather glove for the left hand. These objects were found beneath a bush, just a few inches from Nicole Brown Simpson's body. In addition, blood-stained shoe prints led away from the crime scene. As Nicole's ex-husband, OJ Simpson, was considered a person of interest early on. However, at the time, there was no concrete evidence linking him directly to the murders. Detectives proceeded to Simpson's home on Rockingham Avenue. Outside the residence, they found a white Ford Bronco. After knocking on the door with no response, Detective Furman noticed a bloodstain near the driver's side door handle of the vehicle. He scaled the stone wall surrounding the property and opened the gate from inside. Once inside the property, the detectives continued knocking and ringing the doorbell, but the house remained silent. They eventually approached a series of guest houses behind the main residence. At the first guest house, a man named Kato Kalin, a friend of Simpson's, opened the door. At the second guest house, they met Arnell Simpson, OJ's adult daughter, who let the detectives into the main house, but it was empty. Interrogating Kalin, detectives learned that he and Simpson had been at a McDonald's restaurant in Santa Monica the night before. Afterward, Kalin went to the guest house, while Simpson entered the main house. At 10:45 p.m., Kalin reported hearing 3 loud thumps from the main house. The sound and vibration were so intense that he thought it might be an earthquake. Kalin went outside with a flashlight to investigate and saw a car parked outside. It was the vehicle Simpson had rented to drive to Los Angeles International Airport for a late-night flight to Chicago. A few minutes later, Simpson loaded his luggage into the car and drove off. Meanwhile, Arnell contacted her father's personal assistant and obtained his location, the O'Hare Plaza Hotel in Chicago. Detective Phillips called Simpson to inform him of his ex-wife's death. Though he seemed distraught at the news and expressed concern for his two children, Simpson did not ask any details about Nicole's death. He simply stated he would take an early flight back to Los Angeles. Detective Tom Lang decided to notify Nicole's family about her death before news of the murder broke in the media. At 6:21 a.m., he arrived at Nicole's parents' house and spoke with her father, Lou Brown. When he delivered the news, a piercing scream and sobbing came from a woman inside the house. "OJ did it. He killed her. I knew he would kill her someday," cried Denise, Nicole's sister. After leaving Nicole's parents' house, detectives continued meticulously investigating both the crime scene and Simpson's Rockingham estate. Detective Furman discovered a bloody right-hand glove near the guest house Kaylin was staying in. It matched the left-hand glove found near Nicole's body. Blood trails from the Ford Bronco's door led all the way to Simpson's front door. At the crime scene, Detective Lang noted an unusual blood pattern on the victim's back, possibly from the killer or the murder weapon. To protect Nicole's body from media cameras and preserve evidence, Lang covered her with a sheet taken from the house. As more officers arrived, detectives began examining the male victim. Upon inspecting his clothing, they found a wallet in the back pocket of his jeans. A driver's license identified him as 25-year-old Ronald Lyle Goldman. The left-hand glove found near Nicole's body was also examined. It was an expensive glove, size large, with a cashmere lining and labeled by the brand Eris Isotoner. At the police station, Detective Van Adder noticed OJ Simpson being escorted in handcuffs by officers. Van Adder, unwilling to have Simpson restrained unnecessarily, unlocked the handcuffs. While doing so, he noticed a bandage on Simpson's left middle finger. At this point, Van Adder had no intention of arresting Simpson, as police would only have 48 hours to file charges after an arrest, which wasn't enough time to complete the investigation. Instead, they brought Simpson to the Parker Center at 150 North Los Angeles Street at 12:15 p.m. for questioning. There, Simpson met with his attorneys, including Skip Taft. Detectives were surprised at how relaxed Simpson's lawyers were about the questioning. They even left Simpson alone while they went out for lunch. At 1:35 p.m., the interrogation began, conducted by Detectives Lang and Van Adder. It lasted 37 minutes. At this stage, detectives lacked concrete evidence to charge Simpson and knew he could leave at any time. He had not been formally detained and was under no obligation to answer their questions. Nevertheless, Simpson agreed to provide a blood sample, fingerprints, and photographs of his hand injury. The detectives left the interrogation with only these results. No significant information was obtained, though they noted inconsistencies in Simpson's account, such as the timeline involving the Ford Bronco and the reason for his hand injury. After the interview ended, the detectives returned to their office at 3:30 p.m., while Simpson left with his two attorneys. They reported the information to Captain Galen, who was in charge of homicide and robbery cases. Based on their findings, they believed that Simpson had murdered his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and Ron Goldman. Meanwhile, in Chicago, police visited room 915 at the O'Hare Plaza Hotel, where Simpson had stayed the night before. They found a broken glass in the room. Simpson had claimed he cut his hand before leaving for Chicago, and the wound reopened due to the broken glass. Detective Van Adder returned to the Rockingham estate to collect blood samples as quickly as possible. After securing blood evidence from the scene, he handed the samples over to criminologist Dennis Fung in an envelope. Fung marked the envelope with the time and date, received from Van Adder at 5:20 p.m. on June 13, 1990, before passing it to his assistant for transport. This entire process was observed by journalists gathered outside the estate. During Simpson's trial, his defense team would later scrutinize this procedural action by the police. Earlier, Dennis Fung and his assistant had collected evidence from inside Simpson's house. The Los Angeles Police Department typically used video recordings to document crime scenes during searches of suspects' homes to avoid accusations of tampering. Before the room was filmed at 3 p.m., Fung noticed a pair of size 13 navy blue socks on the bed which he bagged as evidence. However, the person operating the camera forgot to reset the timestamp on the device after it had not been used for a long time. This error led Simpson's defense team to allege that the police had planted the socks at the scene. It is important to note that the socks were a key piece of evidence because DNA analysis revealed Nicole's blood on them. Despite these controversies, other evidence was steadily closing in on Simpson. Nicole Brown Simpson, age 35 at the time of her death, was born on May 19, 1959 in Germany. She grew up to be a tall, beautiful young woman with golden hair and the perfect looks of a Southern California beach queen. According to friends, Nicole lacked the skills for independent living or a professional career. She worked as a waitress at the Daisy nightclub in Beverly Hills, where she first met OJ Simpson. At the time, Nicole was 18, while Simpson, Uri was already married. 8 years later, Simpson divorced his first wife and married Nicole on February 2, 1985. Nicole moved into Simpson's mansion on Rockingham Avenue and lived a dreamlike life until their separation in January 1992. Afterward, Nicole and her children lived in a rented house on Gretna Greenway. Their marriage had deteriorated due to Simpson's violent tendencies. On New Year's Eve in 1989, police had to intervene at the Rockingham residence to resolve a domestic dispute. Simpson was later charged with spousal battery, sentenced to 120 hours of community service, and placed on 2 years probation. On October 25, 1993, Nicole called 911 again. When police arrived at Nicole's house on Gretna Greenway, they found Simpson standing outside, angrily banging on the door. Nicole did not press charges at the time, but she later told LAPD Sergeant Craig Lally that she feared Simpson and his mental state. Simpson's abusive behavior towards Nicole reportedly began early in their relationship. According to Nicole's diary, the violence dated back to 1977. Even while pregnant with their first child, Nicole had sought police help after Simpson used a baseball bat to repeatedly smash her car. During the trial for the murders of Nicole and Ron Goldman in 1995, prosecutors presented a list of 62 documented incidents of physical and emotional abuse committed by Simpson. Nicole's therapist testified that she was constantly subjected to abuse, stating not every hour of the day, but the frequency was alarmingly high. Nicole's mother, Juditha, revealed that a month before her death, Nicole confided that Simpson had threatened her, saying, "If I print to see you with another man, I'll kill you." After separating from Simpson, Nicole had several casual relationships. While living at Gretna Greenway, she rented a spare room to a young man named Brian Gerard Kalin, nicknamed Cato. Kalin became an unpaid housekeeper and babysitter for Nicole. Simpson was visibly uneasy about Nicole living with a young man and offered Kalin a place to stay in the guest house at his Rockingham estate. On the afternoon of the murder, Nicole, her children, parents, and friends attended her daughter Sydney's dance recital at a local school. Simpson also attended, but sat separately and did not interact with anyone. After the recital, they went to an upscale Italian restaurant for dinner. At the restaurant, Nicole introduced her family to a waiter named Ronald Goldman, a close friend she had met a few months earlier. After finishing dinner, Nicole's family left the restaurant at 9 p.m. 40 minutes later, Nicole's mother called the restaurant, saying she had forgotten her glasses there. Goldman agreed to bring the glasses to Nicole after his shift ended. He went home to change clothes and borrowed a car to head to Nicole's house, unaware it would be his last day alive. The third character in this tragedy is, of course, Orenthal James Simpson. Born on July 9, 1947, Simpson joined the Persian Warriors, a street gang, at the age of 13. At 15 in 1962, he was sent to a juvenile detention center in San Francisco. Simpson married a high school friend at 18 and had 2 children. However, due to his talent, Simpson became a national sports icon while attending the University of Southern California. He quickly rose to prominence as a professional football player, spending most of his career with the Buffalo Bills. Retiring in 1979, Simpson became one of the National Football League's most celebrated figures between then and 1985. On June 15, 1994, Alan Park, a limousine driver hired to take Simpson to the airport after the murders, testified to police that Simpson had instructed him to arrive at the Rockingham estate by 10:45 p.m. Park arrived 20 minutes early and tried knocking on the door, but received no response. At 10:50 p.m., Park saw a man dressed in dark clothing hurrying into the house through a side gate. Shortly after, Park knocked again, and someone identifying himself as Simpson responded, explaining he had overslept and would be right down. When Simpson came downstairs, he was sweating profusely and turned on the air conditioning for the entire drive to the airport. Detectives investigating the case also received a call from Jill Silverly, a neighbor of Nicole's. She reported that on Sunday night, while driving to a nearby market, she saw a Ford Bronco run a red light and nearly collide with another car. She recognized the driver as Simpson. On June 16th, preliminary DNA tests on gloves found at the Rockingham estate revealed they contained the blood of Simpson and both victims. The evidence pointed conclusively to Simpson as the killer. Detectives Venator and Lang filed formal charges. On June 17th, after an arrest warrant was issued for Simpson, Detective Lang called Robert Shapiro, Simpson's attorney, and asked him to bring his client to the police station by 11 a.m. At the time, Simpson was at the home of Robert Kardashian in the San Fernando Valley, having just attended a funeral. At 12:35 p.m., when Simpson and his lawyer did not show up, 3 patrol cars were dispatched to Kardashian's residence to arrest him. However, police were informed that Simpson had just left in a Ford Bronco with his friend, Al Cowlings. The Los Angeles Police Department held a press conference announcing Simpson's failure to turn himself in. Attorney Shapiro appeared on television, urging Simpson to surrender immediately. After authorities located Cowlings and Simpson driving the Ford Bronco northbound on Interstate 5 near Orange County, police ordered the vehicle to pull over. Cowlings continued driving at a reduced speed and called 911 from a mobile phone, urging police to remain calm as Simpson was suicidal and had a gun to his head. By this time, the media had caught wind of the low-speed chase. Within moments, several news helicopters joined police helicopters overhead, capturing the event live. With 95 million viewers, the chase became one of the most watched events in U.S. television history. In the previous 50 years, only one event could rival the chase in viewership: the moon landing. The swarm of helicopters resembled a scene from a war movie. At one point, a helicopter from Channel 7 had to return for refueling, forcing the station to rely on footage from Channel 5. Meanwhile, on the ground, crowds gathered along streets and bridges to witness the event. While heading towards Highway 405, Cowlings requested permission to drive directly to Simpson's residence on Rockingham Avenue, which the police granted. Officers were immediately dispatched to Simpson's house. Meanwhile, Orange County police continued to tail the car, even after it crossed into a different jurisdiction. The dramatic, drawn-out chase finally ended when Cowlings parked the car in front of Simpson's house and turned off the engine. At the scene were 27 members of the Los Angeles Police Department's SWAT team, a tactical team, a team of specialists, and negotiators. Nearly an hour later, after being persuaded by negotiators and Cowlings, Simpson exited the Ford Bronco and surrendered. OJ Simpson was arrested on June 17, 1994, but his trial did not begin until January 25, 1995. On the day of Simpson's arrest, detectives found a travel bag in his car containing his passport, a fake beard and mustache, and a gun. Over the next 15 months leading up to his trial, Simpson was held in a jail cell in an area where he was the only inmate. For the prosecution, the case seemed relatively straightforward, with a mountain of evidence against Simpson. He had a history of violence towards Nicole, was jealous after their divorce, and had purchased a knife matching the murder weapon's size and shape. A glove he dropped was found at the crime scene, matching the size of the shoes that left prints leading to the scene. His blood was mixed with the victim's blood. He had motive, opportunity, and no alibi during the time of the murders. For Simpson's defense lawyers, however, the case was even simpler. They portrayed their client as innocent and framed by a group of corrupt, deceitful, and unscrupulous police officers. The lawyers painted Simpson as a black victim, deceived by a predominantly white legal system. However, Simpson himself could not serve as a symbol of racial divide between black and white Americans. In the months leading up to the trial, Simpson's lawyers built their defense strategy around evidence that police had allegedly framed their client. They focused their attacks on Detective Mark Fuhrman. On July 25, 1994, The New Yorker published an article suggesting that Detective Fuhrman had intentionally planted the glove near Simpson's home. The article also highlighted Fuhrman's troubling behavior in the past and his overtly racist views. The Los Angeles police dismissed the accusations, finding it laughable that Foreman could have planted the glove near Simpson's house. He had been the 17th officer to arrive at the crime scene, after many other officers had examined the scene and found no second glove near the victims. However, on August 18, 1994, the defense filed a motion to review Detective Foreman's personnel records. Simpson's attorneys accused the police of unlawfully entering Simpson's property, while the detectives claimed they had entered out of concern for Simpson's safety, not because they viewed him as a suspect. By late September, the defense team had gathered enough information to accuse not only Detective Foreman, but also other members of the Los Angeles Police Department of deliberately planting evidence at both crime scenes. The defense team made bold claims to Time magazine, alleging deep police involvement in framing Simpson. By September 26, the defense lawyers demanded samples of Foreman's hair and those of other detectives, as well as a search of the clothing they had worn and vehicles they had driven on the day of the investigation. They also requested photographs of the detectives' shoe prints to determine if any of them matched the bloody footprints found near Nicole's home. These demands were unprecedented in Los Angeles' legal history. Finally, on November 8, 1994, a jury was selected for the trial. The jury consisted of 8 African Americans, 2 Asian Americans, 1 Latino, and just 1 white juror. Newsweek later commented that the prosecution had essentially lost the criminal trial the day a predominantly African American jury was impaneled. The next day, Simpson's defense attorneys launched their arguments. Lawyer Johnny Cochran asserted that Simpson was an innocent man falsely accused by a prosecution determined to win at all costs. After presenting counter-arguments to the prosecution's case, Simpson stood, approached the jury, and displayed his scarred and injured knees, aiming to prove that he lacked the physical ability to kill anyone. The defense launched an all-out assault to prove their client's innocence with 2 main arguments: allegations of police racial bias and mishandling of blood and DNA evidence. Detective Foreman remained the primary target of Simpson's legal team. He became a tool for the defense to help exonerate their client, so much so that Fred Goldman, the father of victim Ronald Goldman, declared in a press conference that the trial had turned into an indictment of Detective Foreman. Fred even angrily accused defense attorney Johnny Cochran of being the real racist. Simpson's legal team, however, appeared to have achieved their objective of portraying Foreman as a dangerous officer prone to fabricating evidence against African-American defendants. Next, criminologist Dennis Fung and his assistant became targets of the defense. Attorney Peter Neufeld accused Fung and his assistant of negligence in collecting blood evidence from the crime scene. The defense further alleged that the police had taken excess blood from Simpson at the station, which they later used to plant evidence against him. The prosecution relied heavily on a pair of leather gloves. According to store records, Nicole Brown had purchased 2 pairs of gloves on December 20th, 1990. This particular glove model had been produced in limited quantities, only 300 pairs, and sold exclusively at Bloomingdale's department store in New York between 1989 and 92. Of the 300 pairs made, 240 were sold, and the rest returned to the manufacturer. The gloves had distinctive stitching, making them easily recognizable. The prosecution showed photographs of Simpson wearing the same gloves during football broadcasts in 1993 and 94. In court, prosecutor Darden requested Simpson try on a similar pair of gloves. In a dramatic moment in front of television cameras, Simpson struggled to put them on, claiming they were too tight. Richard Rubin, a former vice president at Aris Gloves, the glove manufacturer, explained that moisture had caused the gloves to shrink by 1 size. Later in the trial, Simpson tried on another identical pair, and this time they fit. However, the initial damage to the prosecution's case concerning the gloves was already done, and it couldn't be undone, even though Simpson ultimately fit the gloves. Regarding the shoe prints at the crime scene, an FBI expert confirmed that they matched a pair of Bruno Magli's shoes manufactured in Italy, retailing for $160 per pair, and distributed to only 40 retailers in the U.S. Only 300 size 12 pairs, the same size as Simpson's, were sold, and just 9% of the U.S. population wears size 12. Simpson claimed he never owned such shoes, calling them ugly as hell. However, on September 26, 1993, an Associated Press photo showed Simpson wearing Bruno Magli's shoes at a stadium in New York. Despite this evidence, the jury seemed unimpressed. Another FBI expert on hair and fiber testified about hairs found on Goldman's shirt and in a cap at the crime scene. These hairs matched Simpson's hair characteristics. Additionally, fibers on the glove found at Simpson's residence matched Nicole's and Goldman's hair. Black and blue cotton fibers on Goldman's shirt also matched fibers from socks found in Simpson's bedroom. Fibers from the cap matched the stitching fibers of the gloves, and fibers from Simpson's Ford Bronco also matched those on the gloves and the cap. Once again, this evidence had little impact on the jury. Ultimately, much of the mountain of evidence presented by the prosecution failed to sway the jury. The reasons could be attributed either to the prosecution's lack of preparation and clarity or the defense's skillful manipulation of evidence to plant reasonable doubt in the jurors' minds. The jury's decision in this case became one of the most highly anticipated outcomes in legal history. The intense battle of wits and arguments between the prosecution and the defense dragged on, making this trial the longest in California's history by the time it concluded. The jury was utterly exhausted after being sequestered for 9 long months. On the day of the verdict, news helicopters swarmed above the courthouse, and police cars patrolled the streets of downtown Los Angeles. Barricades were set up in front of the courthouse to control traffic. The judge asked the jury foreperson to hand the verdict to the court clerk. In a tense atmosphere, the clerk's voice trembled as she read the verdict. In the Superior Court of California, County of Los Angeles, in the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA097211, we, the jury, find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder. The public's reaction to the verdict had been predicted beforehand. African Americans across the United States celebrated with joy, while white Americans expressed profound disappointment. The trial was an unprecedented media event in American history and became a major news story worldwide. Although the criminal trial concluded, the legal system had not yet finished with OJ Simpson. A year later, on October 23, 1996, another trial began, and once again, he was the defendant. This time, the trial took place at a court in Santa Monica before a jury composed of 1 African American, 1 Latino, 1 Asian, and 9 white jurors. This civil trial, initiated by the families of Ronald Goldman and Nicole Brown, sought damages. The purpose of the civil trial was merely to determine whether it was more likely than not that the defendant had committed the crimes. On February 4, 1990, the jury awarded Ronald Goldman's mother $8.5 million in compensatory damages. A few days later, they ruled that Nicole's children and Ronald Goldman's father would receive a shared punitive damage award of $25 million. On September 14, 2007, OJ Simpson, then 60 years old, made headlines again when he was involved in an armed robbery at the Palace Station Casino and Hotel in Las Vegas. On October 3, 2008, exactly 13 years after being acquitted of his ex-wife's murder, Simpson was found guilty of armed robbery and other charges related to the incident. On December 5, 2008, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after 9 years of good behavior. Simpson served his sentence at the Lovelock Correctional Center in Lovelock, Nevada. Thus, one of the most scandalous cases in American history reached its conclusion. Some lenient observers might claim that justice was served through the law of karma. However, that may not entirely be accurate. What do you think about OJ Simpson in this case?